Hey everyone, this is Mike Yao coming back with you for another video. Uh, so as you may or may not know, I'm the designer of Savage Kingdoms role-playing game, but today's video is about Dungeons and Dragons mostly. So here's my game, Savage Kingdoms. The current edition is Savage Kingdoms Reforged, which is basically a 1.5 edition, as some of you may know or may not know. And of course, this is Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. That's the player's handbook at any rate. So today's video is about how to, is basically my D&D 5e rules hacks or house rules in order to make Dungeons and Dragons. When I run it, I don't run it as often as my own game, of course. But when I do use the same setting. I use the Savage Kingdom setting, which goes back 25 years ago for me. So it's all in my head really well, not to mention all the stuff that's published and written down, but even more than the things that are published and written down, there's 10 times as much in my head. So it's just easy for me to run the very detailed setting, which I prefer. If you like Forgotten Realms, Greyhawk, and all those other settings, Eberron, etc., Dark Sun, which I love, that's great, more power to you, but I tend to run out of my setting. So in order to make it not so jarringly different between using the 5th edition rules and the Savage Kingdoms rules, when using the Savage Kingdoms setting, I've had to make a few rules adjustments. And so I wanted to share some of these because some of you guys may want to take these down for your own use, for your own suggestions, or at least maybe try them out and see what happens. So anyway, I've got 10 of these basically in no particular order. So my number one house rule for Dungeons and Dragons Savage Kingdoms D&D 5e rules hacks is natural healing. So for natural healing, this occurs during a short rest or long rest, as the core rule is written, and the DM's guide has some various suggestions, but the core rule is written is that during a short rest, you get to spend hit dice, right? You roll your hit dice to see how many hit points you regain as a form of natural healing. And long rest, I believe you heal automatically, or you get to roll all your hit dice. It's a little unclear. I should probably look it up. But anyway, it doesn't really matter, particularly to me, because I don't like really either of those. I think that's too much. I think it's very video gamey, which is probably the point. So I like to generally do, like my last video about grounding your fantasy, I like to sort of base fantasy in some sort of reality. I think any author, well-known, particularly successful author, worth his salt or her salt, is probably going to agree with you there. You have to ground your fantasy in order to make it really connect and resonate. So in order to do so, even in Dungeons and Dragons, which is very fantastical, obviously, you still need to ground it. You still need to have it doesn't have to necessarily be gritty, but it has to be some form of believability. Otherwise, somebody takes 12 points of damage and an hour later suddenly it's most likely back, which is just not a very good investment. It doesn't really allow people to dig and invest into their characters and what's really going on. So my hack for that is after a short rest, if a character succeeds in a DC 15 medicine check, then they restore 1 hit die to the patient. So they could be working on themselves, they could be working on another patient, a willing patient, of course, and that patient would gain 1 hit die back. So if that's a cleric or druid, it's a 1d8 plus your constitution modifier. If it's a warrior type, the d10 types like fighters and rangers and paladins, it's 1d10 plus constitution modifier. A sorcerer or wizard, I think, is d6, 1d6 plus constitution modifier return. Yeah, rogues d8, monks d8. Anyway, you know what the hit dice are. So basically 1 hit die is restored after 1 hour of short rest. That's not particularly that's uneventful for the most part. No fighting, no sprinting and climbing and crazy stuff. So basically, like it says, a rest. So this medicine check on a patient during this time is pretty, not only pretty realistic, but you would see this occur in many fantasy novels. The group of heroes stops for a moment, or the band of warriors stops for a moment, and they clean their wounds and they stitch up and they do whatever they have to field medicine, as the military would call it, to regain at least some semblance of your vitality back. So I think that's a fairly good in between sort of hack there. So for a long rest, after a full 8-hour long rest, that's more or less uneventful. You would automatically gain 1 hit die back per character resting, or half of your hit dice return back if with a successful DC. I think I made it 15 again, maybe 10. Anyway, DC, it could be whatever you want, but I feel like DC 15 is pretty good. That's average to slightly above average difficulty to hit. So yeah, so long rest, 1 hit die automatically spent or rolled for natural healing for each character involved in the or the long rest, or with a DC 15 medicine check, half the hit dice restore. So again, fairly realistic. It makes resting a more serious thing. You want to have your watches, you want to have your guards, you want to use whatever magic's available to you to help with that, such as the alarm spell or whatnot. So, all right, so that's natural healing. That alone to me is resolved a lot of things. Number 2, this is another thing that even better than natural healing to me resolves a lot of issues. Spell points. So in standard D&D, they have spell slots, which admittedly is an improvement over how it used to be with the memorization and that sort of thing. But I'm still not happy with it. I don't even like the term spell slots. It's not very evocative of fantasy literature. It's still kind of clunky, especially teaching new players. I do teach and run some D&D clubs in the area, an RPG camp where I have mostly middle-aged school kids, but also some early high school age kids getting into the game, and they love it and they super enjoy it. But the one thing that hangs them up, and older players too, is the spell slot thing. Once you get it, it's pretty simple, but it's kind of clunky language. I've never liked spell memorization. People that know me, that I've been doing this hobby for ridiculous 39 years or whatever it is, and I've never liked the spell memorization. I think when I was a kid, when I first started playing D&D when I was 15, 16, didn't know much better. Of course, I embraced it and did it because that's all there was available to you. But pretty quickly, I became sort of a dabbling game designer, as we all, a lot of us were to some degree, and figured out there's got to be a different way to do it. So my modernized way of doing it is spell points. Now, the Dungeon Master's Guide does have a spell point system. And that's great, but I still think it kind of misses the mark. I feel like there's maybe too many spell points. I don't know. My system is pretty simple. So basically, you look at the table in the book. It shows in the player's handbook. It shows the number of spell slots according to your class. You just simply add those together. Add them all up to a sum total. So if the chart says, I was going to look one up for you, but I think you guys know what I'm talking about. So if the chart says whatever level character gets 3 first level spell slots and 2 second level spell slots, this is an example, you just add them together. That would be 5. That's how many spell points you have. If you cast a second level spell, you spend 2. If you cast a first level spell, you spend 1 slot. So basically 1 slot or 1 point, now I'm doing it, 1 point per spell level. Very simple. So you just add those together. If it's a higher level character and it says 4 first level spell slots and 2 second level and 1/3, add those together. The sum total of spell points is 7. That also tells you what the highest level spell that you know, in this case 3rd level, is what you can cast. So all that information is still relevant in the table. You don't have to print out a new thing. You just simply add those numbers together, and it also tells you the maximum spell level that you know how to cast per the standard rules. So going a little further into that, so I have a rule also that you can actually cast your magic into 0 or beyond 0 spell points. So say, for example, you have 5 spell points, and during your adventuring day, during the quest, during the journey, you expend all of those spell points. You used all your magical energy, all your magical, in Savage Kingdoms we call it stamina, your mystical and magical stamina, and become 0. That's fine. But if you have 1 spell point left and you want to cast a second level spell, which would take 2, right? Put you in a -1. You could totally do that, but that gives you a level of exhaustion. So you get 1 level of exhaustion per negative spell point. So for example, if you knew how to cast 3rd level spells and you had 1 spell point left and you wanted to cast this, you needed to cast this mighty 3rd level spell, you could do so, but I would put you at -2 spell points, which of course means 2 levels of exhaustion. Now you have to have at least 1 spell point to cast into the negatives. If you're at 0, you just have nothing to dig into to cast. So, and that still allows some level of creativity and resource management. So that's my spell point hack. That probably even more than natural healing has resolved so many things. I also don't use spell preparation. If you know the spell, you you know how to cast it. You don't have to do this. I study for a minute, or I pray for a minute. You could totally do that, and hopefully narratively you're describing that's what you're doing, but it's not really a game mechanic. And besides, it's such a minor thing, it doesn't really, I don't think it really matters. So if you know the spell, you can cast it. You might ask, well, maybe this goes against sorcerers in a way, because sorcerers have the spontaneous casting, and maybe it benefits wizards, but I feel like it's such a minor thing, it doesn't. And sorcerers get so many cool bloodline abilities that I think it's fine. So, let's see, wait, okay, yeah, number 3, that was number 2. Number 3, critical failures. So a lot of gamers have this thing, we do this thing where you roll a natural 1 on the d20 and something crazy happens. And that's all well and good, but if you really break it down mathematically, that's 5% of the time. So you're playing this heroic character that's someone perhaps even the equal of an Aragorn or a Gandalf or even a Frodo or whatever, and 1 out of 20 times you are dropping your sword or you're stabbing another person or something crazy happens, what people call critical failures. So now in D&D Core 5th edition, there really is no such thing. I think the DM's Guide talks about them, but there is no actual official rule for critical failures. Dungeon Masters, Game Masters just decide to implement them on a 1. Now in Savage Kingdoms, there is a critical failure system, but it's really hard to get. You have to roll a natural 1. If you roll a natural 1 on the d20, you add your total, and then you roll a d20 again and subtract. If you end up with a 0 or less, it's a critical failure. So the better you are at something, it rarely happens that you critically fail, which is good. That could make you fall down prone. It can make you break if it's a brittle weapon or a poor quality weapon, or you could fumble your weapon, your helmet slides over your eyes for a moment, you smack your shield into your tooth. There's a whole list in Savage Kingdoms of things that could happen, and these are things that you could quickly come up with as a game master or dungeon master also. So my rules hack for critical failures is I still have them, but one or two things need to happen. The final result of the natural 1 needs to be a 0 or less. So if you are making a skill roll or ability check and you're at -1 on that and you roll a 1 and -1 makes it 0, that's a critical failure. So if you have a 0 or better modifier and you roll a natural 1, then you're good. It's not going to be a critical failure unless the GM really wants to do some minor thing with it. The other thing would be that if you are rolling at disadvantage, meaning you roll 2d20 and take the lowest, and one of those is a 1, that's a critical failure. I really like that because you are rolling it. It is disadvantage. It gives it even more weight to disadvantage. It's like, okay, you can try that, but it's at disadvantage because your odds of rolling a 1 or on 2 dice are relatively decent. So that could be a failure. And I think thematically it sets it up pretty well since you're rolling at disadvantage. So again, real quickly, critical failures and my rules hack of D&D 5 is that the final result must be a 0 or less, or at disadvantage, one of the if you roll a 1 on disadvantage. Number 4, Ranger Beastmaster, always a thing. So there's sort of a official, unofficial fix for this on the Unearthed Arcana or whatever. I think that's the articles that Wizards of the Coast releases that have the playtest materials, right? I don't look at it a lot, so I'm not super familiar with it, but I think that's what it's called, Unearthed Arcana. So there's a fix for the Ranger, right? The Ranger class, people felt, particularly the Beastmaster, people felt was a little underwhelming. I mostly agree. I don't think it was as bad as a lot of people were claiming, but yeah, I mostly agree. It was a little underwhelming. So a simple fix for the Ranger Beastmaster, if you don't want to use the Unearthed Arcana, which a Ranger in my campaign currently is, and that's fine. A simple fix to me was you give a bonus action to command your animal. Yeah, simple as that. I thought it was fine. It worked well. So bonus action. So as written, you use your action to command your beast to attack or track or follow or whatever. So in this case, my rules hack is simply it's a bonus action to command your animal. So that means you still have your main action to do whatever. All right, number 5 is heavy armor. Now this one I actually really haven't used. This is kind of an optional rule. I don't think I've used it yet actually, and that's heavy armor. So rules as written, heavy armor gives you disadvantage to stealth checks, which makes sense. Heavy armor is heavy and sometimes a little noisy. It's not clankety as noisy as a lot of people like to sort of make fun of if you've ever worn real armor. But it can be a little clunky. So disadvantage on stealth makes sense. So my rules hack is heavy armor also grants disadvantage to acrobatics rolls, as it probably should be, and athletics checks when swimming. Not when climbing, but when swimming. Again, I haven't implemented these, but these are possibly good ideas. And I think I've heard of a couple other people doing this as well. Disadvantage to acrobatics, as well as to disadvantage to athletics checks when swimming. That's for heavy armor. In addition to disadvantage for stealth. Now, I understand why the base rule is just for stealth, because that's kind of a fairly major skill. It's kind of a big deal. And they probably didn't want to bog it down with too many disadvantages for heavy armor. But I think this is also pretty good. It's somewhat realistic if you want to use it. Again, I haven't yet, but there it is. It's an option. House rule number 6, hit points. All right, so a lot of people, myself included, hit points are great. We all know what they kind of represent. At sort of the low level of a character, it's probably mostly meat. But hello, birdie. There's a very pretty birdie outside just visiting. Looks like an oriole. He's just walking up on the front porch. Very cool. Anyway, a little distracted by bird there. So as we know that low-level hit points represent mostly meat or flesh, as people like to call it, but you get hit points very quickly. They stack up as you gain experience levels or character levels. They become in the 40s, 50s, 80s sometimes. So then they start representing more like armor, more like taking glancing blows, more like luck, skill as well, like last minute reactions to things. So that 10-point damage stab from a sword that you would have taken that might have finished you as a first level character. As a 5th level character, it's mostly a glancing blow. It might still hurt a little bit. It might take you a little bit to heal, but it's not a super big deal. The opposite of that, Savage Kingdoms, where health, you gain health as you gain advancements very, very slowly. So it's a little more realistic in the fact that it is more like your flesh and your toughness. But we know in Dungeons and Dragons that it's more of a abstract. So, however, and I think a lot of people will agree when they have talked to a lot of other designers and players about this, hit points do become bloated to an extent that they hard to justify even at higher levels. It's like somebody's walking around a barbarian with 110 hit points, and at the same time you look at a warhorse stats and it has 37 hit points, and you're like, really? So the man suddenly is 3 times tougher than the big horse or the bull or whatever real world animal that we compare it to. Again, because the hit points are representing different things, but it still gets a little hard to justify. So my little fix is actually a nod to first edition when Gary Gygax designed the game with Dave Arneson's help, of course. First edition AD&D. After 10th level, you just gained 1 hit point per level. That was it. So my fix is that, but a little bit of a modification to it. So every level after 10th level, you gain 1 hit point or your Constitution modifier in hit points, whichever is higher. So if you have no con bonus. Obviously, you'll gain 1 hit point. If you have a 16 or 17 Constitution, which gives you a +3 con modifier, that will give you 3 hit points per level after 10. So it slows it down. It also makes another problem that comes up is that higher level characters are very often difficult to challenge, even with really legendary, what should be terrible and monstrous foes. So this little leveling of hit points will make it more challenging for them. It'll make it more scary. They'll be more respectful. That's another little issue I have sometimes. Maybe I should do a video about that, where player characters are often not respecting the setting, particularly your foes in the setting, and they totally should be. They totally should be terrified of the dragon that lives over the mountain, or the demon that could be summoned by this particular wizard, or whatever the foe may be. So this will definitely help with that, and will help the hit point bloat issue, which is the main thing. That was number 6. Number 7 is finite cleric and druid spells. This is another problem I've had since like 2nd edition D&D, is that the priestly type classes, so clerics and druids, particularly in this case, but I think it also applies to paladins and rangers, sort of the wisdom-based divine spellcasters, have access to this entire spell list, as long as it's of a level they can cast, which to me is crazy. So meanwhile, the wizard, who's supposed to be incredible at magic and memorizing stuff, is limited to, spells in a spell book. Somehow these priestly types just tap into like anything that's on the spell list. So the problem with that is the spell list is in a game system that continually reinvents itself or continually puts out new product. The spell list continues to grow. So Player's Handbook, now Xanathar's Guide to Everything, Sword Coast Adventure, whatever. All of these add new spells. So suddenly the list they can choose from is even more massive and even more difficult to comprehend. So my fix to that is at first level, a cleric or druid starts with, they know 8 spells plus their wisdom modifier. And then every level after they learn 2 more. And you can narrate how this occurs, how they learn it. It is wisdom based. Their spellcasting is wisdom based, so that implies that that's intuition and willpower and experience. So often it's that it comes to them in prayer or mystical knowledge. But in the Savage Kingdom setting, I'm definitely not beyond clerics and druids learning spells as wizards do. I mean, there's not as much of a distinction. In the actual Savage Kingdoms, true Savage Kingdoms, there really isn't a distinction at all. You can call yourself a wizard or a priest, but even the priests are learning magic from temple tomes and from scrolls and stuff. They might claim it comes to them in prayer, but the reality is that most of the stuff is written down or is passed down orally. And maybe it did at some point have a divine origin, but that's more of a fluff setting thing and not a hard mechanic. So that's a good. So 8 plus wisdom modifier, number of known first level spells for clerics or druids or paladins, and then 2 per level that they learn afterwards. All right, so number 8. Number 8 is falling damage, another kind of weird, contentious subject. So standard D&D falling damage has always been and still is in 5th edition 1d6 of bludgeoning damage per 10 feet of falling, which is pretty simple. At the 10 to 20 foot falls, it's even fairly realistic, I would say. But then when you start to fall at distances of 30 feet, 40, 50, it's not enough damage. I mean, that's you can look up the science on falling and exponential damage that occurs from falling at certain heights and all that stuff. But in general, so my rules hack for that is again pretty simple. So it's half again a number of d6s in damage. So for example, if you fall 60 feet instead of 6d or 6d6 damage, you would 9d6 damage. So half again, round downwards. So if you fall 30 feet, half again would be 1d, so you'd be 46 of falling damage. So you can see the first falling, the first 10, 20 feet doesn't really change much. But then at 30 feet, it's another d6. At 50 would be 2 more d6s. So yeah, just half again in d6 damage. Falling damage in standard D&D taps out, I think, at is it 10 or 20 d6? So in this case, it would be 30 d6. Or is it 15 or 30? I probably should have looked up what the actual rule is. It's either 10 or 20 d6 is the maximum. So it would be 50% more than that would be the maximum based on my formula. So yeah, pretty easy way to do it. It's a little more realistic. It also prevents the silly thing like it's only a 50-foot fall and I have 80, I can take so much damage. Even if I take maximum damage, I'll still be fine. It's like, well, nobody should really know that. I mean, like in character. So that should fix that, at least somewhat. Number 9, races. I just threw this one on here. This is more of a Savage Kingdom thing. You can use whatever races you want, and there's some great ones. But in my setting for Savage Kingdom setting, I don't use Dragonborn. I don't have Tieflings. I don't have Gnomes for sure, and I don't even have Halflings. Which almost breaks my heart because I'm a big Lord of the Rings fan, and I really like hobbits and halflings. But it doesn't really fit the setting I created, which is a little grittier, more sword and sorcery. It's a little bit sort of Conan meets Game of Thrones. And I couldn't really quite justify the halflings in there in my own setting. But I love the race. Dragonborn, when I run the after-school camps and stuff, I let the kids play Dragonborn characters because a lot of them love them, but they don't really fit my setting. In my opinion, what Dragonborn does is demystify dragons, and I don't like that. Dragons are a big deal to me. I was born in the year of the dragon. I play Dungeons and Dragons. I like fantasy, so therefore dragons are part of me. So playing a Dragonborn, sort of a dragon-ish humanoid, to me kind of demystifies them. So that's why I don't have them. The way they're designed mechanically, I think they're really cool, actually. But Tieflings, I don't have, but I do have. There is a demon blood is kind of a theme that fairly often comes up in Savage Kingdoms. It's a talent you can take in true Savage Kingdoms to have demon blood. So that kind of thing exists, but not to the extent where they're a known race, where they just always come out looking the same. And I don't really like the name Tiefling that much either. So in a way, thematically, I have Tieflings, but they're not called that, and they're not really a player character choice. It's more of a demon blood feat that you can choose. So, and also it's a sorcerer bloodline you can choose. All right, so that was races in general. Last thing, number 10, not hit points, experience points, EXPs, experience points. So the way I do them, I've never been happy with the base D&D system, where it's mostly you earn experience points by defeating foes in combat. Now, if you really expand it out, the way it probably should be is that if you overcome the foe, if you sneak around the opponent, if you negotiate with them properly, perhaps even befriend them even better, or you do fight them and they run off. Remember, it's not killing your opponent; it's defeating your opponent. So anybody who has any military background know that defeating or neutralizing your opponent is really the goal. It's not necessarily to kill them; it's to defeat them, to rout them, to get. Occasionally, maybe there's a sub goal where you have to assassinate and kill someone. But in general, militarily speaking, the objective is to win the encounter, to neutralize the opponent. To capture the opponent is often the best thing. You can get information that way. You can make a hostage exchange. So what I'm getting at is experience points. The way it's written, that's great if you use it like the expansive way I just suggested, but it still sort of heavily implies combat. So I tend to use my Savage Kingdom system where you gain 1 experience point per hour of gameplay, plus a bonus of 0 to 3 points at the end of this session, depending on sportsmanship. Good role-playing, staying in character for the most part, coming up with good ideas, heroic things, contributing to the overall fun of the experience. So yeah, 1 XP per hour plus 0 to 3 bonus. And then I have a whole chart I could probably show you, but in general, so if you get to 10, that's 10 XP is second level, 22 is third, and then 34. So basically it just increases by 2 or not by 2, but it doubles and then goes by 2. So in other words, 10, 22, 34, 46, 58, etc. So that makes it you're still makes the advancement a little slower and kind of realistic in a way, but without being too ridiculous. And in truth, I kind of play it by ear. The current campaign I'm running, I sort of use that as a guideline just to kind of tell me where the characters are, but I also kind of use a milestone system sort of in my head. So if I look and go, oh, they're 8 XP away from the next level. But since they're so close, if they complete this next story arc, then they'll be that level. So using the 2 kind of gives me a good idea personally how to award experience points and how advancement should go. So, all right, that's it. That was 10. I probably there's a couple other minor things I use, but that's the 10 main things. Those are my Dungeons & Dragons 5e Savage Kingdoms rules hacks. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Maybe you will consider using some of these. Maybe they're terrible. Maybe they're awesome. Maybe they're whatever. The 5e system in general is actually pretty good. I just feel like I just had to do some of these because a few things bugged me, and then a few things are more like aesthetic choices to streamline better into the setting and to overall tell the story and give a appropriate atmosphere to the players for their enjoyment. All right, so hope you guys enjoyed, and I will talk to you all soon enough. Have a good one.